I will now briefly consider the interface between civil society and the market. Where the economy, and I'm probably simplifying the point that Mark was making, where the economy is driven by rent-seeking, institutions will always be under threat of capture. In such context, civil society has a key role to play, not just protecting the state and criminal justice system from capture, but also to advocate and mobilize for a new accumulation logic. Because the accumulation logic based on rent-seeking is problematic, even for sustaining democracy. Our economy must quickly transition towards a logic where innovation, entrepreneurship, and productivity is rewarded, not political connectedness. Where rent-seeking and patronage shape accumulation patterns, democratic and inclusive institutions will be undermined and quickly become exclusive institutions serving narrow elites. In this sense, civil society must become seized with building an inclusive economy. It is not enough just to protect democratic institutions while the underlying causes rooted in the economy are not addressed. We may have favorable leadership currently with President Ramaphosa, but we cannot count on individual personalities. In fact, we need to think through mechanisms of ensuring accountability of presidency. Because I think if there's any lesson in the past couple of years that showed we had presidency in terms of our constitution is probably the most powerful institution. If it is not held accountable, it spells disaster for the country. Unless we address the underlying determinants, our institutions will forever be at risk. The solution lies in transforming our highly concentrated economy and working collectively to build an innovative entrepreneurial class to replace the parasitic class. This is our greatest insurance policy against capture. And so the issue about the economy should be central. How do we deal with jobs, with inequality, with transforming the economy, changing ownership patterns, etc. That's fundamental to the debate and discourse on state capture. Inequality, especially along racial lines, feed into politics of polarization. Currently, the preoccupation of civil society on matters of economy in many instances focuses on the solidarity economy and social economy and sometimes township economy and that kind of stuff. This is important, of course. I mean, we have to deal with those things. But we should go beyond that and start focusing on transforming the real economy and building a new national consensus on inclusive growth. This must be part of the common interest around which civil society can be mobilized. And probably that's the first message that I'm passing today. I think with transition in 1994, civil society gave up some of its responsibility in terms of agenda setting and consensus building. Defining and serving the common interest was left instead to political parties and to the ruling party, the ANC, and the newly formed state. Civil society organizations transitioned to government service delivery agents as donor funding dried up. I know Mcebisi come from that space. Many moved towards to survive, became service provider to government because their sustainability was threatened. Of course, you have a few examples like check on around issue-based institutions and organizations that emerged in the past, reflecting the growing failure of the state to deliver. But generally, I think civil society tends to kind of, in that period, moved in a different direction. Of course, this has changed post-2009 with the growing realization that the state building project was failing. And I think the driver of the remobilization of civil society was the realization that there was faltering in the national state building project, which of course was represented by state capture and corruption. State capture and corruption have significantly weakened the state. repurposing it away from service delivery to the service delivery mandate. This has eroded its legitimacy and hollowed out leadership and technical capacity. Services aimed at enabling economic inclusion, such as education and training, have yielded suboptimal results. Investor confidence has declined with weak management of the economy and increased policy uncertainty. The economy has stagnated, unemployment grown, and social discontent increased, not only among unemployed, but also the working and middle classes, who saw their living standards decline. Sustained low growth resulted in reduced revenue and less space for fiscal consolidation or fiscal stimulation. This discontent fueled the rise of anti-democratic populism, which, under the guise of indigenization, was used to consolidate state capture and undermine constitutionally provided checks and balances. Fortunately, the state capture project did not succeed, but enormous damage has been inflicted on institutions, the economy, and broader society, and in particular the local state. The fact that and I think as an example of that failure and that damage, is that if you go through our security organs, the police in particular, you will actually realize that almost many of police commissioners in the democratic era have been accused of corruption and improper conduct. And that is reflective of the crisis in the criminal justice system. The experience of state capture is in no measure partly due to weaknesses and repurposing of the security and intelligence structures. It was perpetuated through improper use and stealing of covert funds, and of course the report showed, deliberate use of the intelligence structures to target opponents of capture, and creation of a culture of fear of state power, which remains very strong. None of this has yet been undone, despite the extensive and damning findings of the Mcebisi panel. The intelligence community remains with unknown loyalties. This remains a danger to national security and well-being of the nation. The best example is the perennial the outbreak of what many people call the xenophobic attacks. And the suspicion that all of us have that it was driven by unknown forces. The fact that our intelligence could have helped us understand that better. The rule of law is not only about justice and security, but also has implications for how the global community views us. We cannot exist with deeply flawed and compromised security agencies and expect to attract investment, let alone take our place in fighting global security. And that talks to the Hawks, SIU, the police. They have lost credibility and integrity. We're heading in the right direction in broad terms because there's new appointments into these structures, appointment of the head of NPA, etc. And of course that process has been, particularly with NPA, there's been a bit of public process of going through the process of appointing these structures. We must insist as civil society that the process of appointing people into these structures has to be transparent. And many people don't realize that a couple of years ago, we nearly got really funny creatures, and we had funny creatures as head of the structures. And because this was not a transparent process, I don't want to mention names. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And that's important. The transparency in the appointments of these structures is also central to the success of our project. And I want to conclude by obviously moving towards what suggestions I'm making. And let's face it, our country is in a crisis, precisely because it is controlled by vagrancies of the party in power and party politics. And just think, if in Nazareth a couple of votes went the other way, where will we be today? The only way to counter this, obviously, is the creation of, in one part, I think, is the creation of a strong and independent bureaucracy across all levels of government. So the issue about the state assuming character is so fundamentally important. And the only way for the state to assume a character is for the bureaucracy to actually be independent and strong and capable of delivering the services that it's supposed to deliver. And this is not only about ending the infestation of corruption, but about ensuring enduring functionality of the state. And let's face it, I mean, the functionality of the state remains a problem. And if we can't devise means of dealing with this, we'll actually be doomed. So that's one level, beginning the separation between the political and the state, the bureaucracy, and beginning to build an independent bureaucracy. It is there in paper. And that talks to appointments, systems of changing the system, overhauling systems of appointment, etc. Now that's a long-term project. Now, and that brings me to my second point, that we need to think through strategies for execution in the short term. Now, if you think you're going to solve the problem of ESCOM or whatever utility or whatever department, Justice Department, etc., by transforming the system, that will take you 10, 20 years or even 50 years. State is very difficult to transform by its very nature. So I would argue that I think one of the things that we need to gravitate towards is actually thinking smart on these issues and beginning to create cells of execution where we assemble institution capability that's focused on particular tasks and serves and implement that task to drive development and delivery in those areas. The second area, obviously, is about building a more robust civil society that shifts from short-term to a bit more long-term agenda, as it were. And there are a couple of, I think, action that I would suggest we should consider. And that's important because civil society has the biggest potential to counter the politics of polarization and the politics of fear. And that's real in our economy now. I mean, if you're sitting here, you don't realize that how many people in South Africa are in hiding. I mean, seriously, I mean, there are many, by the way, who are in hiding. And that's a problem. And that cannot be sustained, I mean, if we think that these things will work. So the first, I think, issue I would suggest, and again, I'm sure you've dealt with, I hope, is that we need to think carefully about organizing and coordinating a civil society into a broad coalition or a broad front, so to speak, of civil society organizations. And in that, I think, try to design a more pragmatic agenda that binds the organizations involved. And this could be a whole range of areas that we could look at: democratic protection, anti-corruption, state building, and inclusive growth, and a host of other things. And this is effectively rethinking political agency, breaking the mode about thinking that common good will be defined by a vanguard party, as I've said, and the state. That realize that actually the lesson that we have over the last couple of years is that if we cannot mobilize society and civil society begins to kind of start playing a role in defining what is in the public interest is something that would lead us to failure. The second, of course, is about ensuring that we coordinate a process of setting up a new national strategic narrative for the country. At the moment, think about it, we are a country with no national agenda, effectively. I mean, we are so fractious, and there is no national agenda. I mean, somebody might quickly say there is NDP. I would ask in which shelf. So in reality, there is no kind of common shared vision. And I think part of establishing this coordinating platform should be about that. The second area, obviously, the third area is about ensuring that we run a coordinated program of civic education. Now, this is important because I think if you think about citizens are always vulnerable to misinformation, what comes out of social media, etc., etc. People are misinformed on a consistent basis. And I think we need to think through how we could run a national program around civic education, just to kind of educate people on the basics of what we stand for as a country and rebuild the concept of a South African nation that is actually being fragmented on a daily basis, as it were. But in addition to this, I think we need to think about a couple of big campaigns. And now, and there could be many, and I want to use two examples on these big campaigns. The first is, we should, if you think about it, there is something fundamentally flawed with our electoral system. And I would think that, and it's not, it doesn't need, you don't need to be a genius to realize that. You don't need to be a genius to realize that. And I mean, the one of the examples is that just chairpersons of in parliament, of committees, and so on and so on, how they get decided, and so on and so on. It's actually, the problem is, it stems from the flawed electoral system that we have. So we need actually to, and that's the first campaign. I'm saying we probably need a national campaign for changing the electoral system in this country, so that we enhance accountability, etc., etc. Again, some people say start looking at the Van Zyl Slabbert report or whatever. I don't. That's not my issue. But my issue is that we need to run a campaign. We need to make it a talk that it is problematic. Effectively, our system says that our role is just to vote parties, and the parties can decide what they do. Effectively, if they decide that they are going to deploy criminals, so it be. And we must run that campaign, and we must run it as a national campaign and drive it as civil society and drive discourse and debates around that. The second campaign is, and I'm saying this very guardedly, comments, I'm saying this second one very guardedly, but I think that the criminal justice system must become a center of occupation, of preoccupation. Now, we can talk about what's happened at national. I mean, I was in a local area recently. It's actually, if you go to townships and you realize how vulnerable citizens are in townships, not only the integrity of the police, etc., but also the growing tendency at local level of the integration between the political elite, the criminal elite, and the security clusters at local level. It's phenomenal in many municipalities. I think Chipre Oliver is out. But I can tell you now, in many municipalities, that's a big issue that we're facing. So that's the first point, that I think we need to really run a campaign around the strengthening and improving the integrity of our criminal justice system. But the other part of it is that we need prosecution. We need speedy prosecution of these cases. And I'm not saying we need a campaign or anything. They will come back and say, we have a problem. They have a problem of capacity, there's new appointments, etc. There's no money, etc., etc. And I think as citizens and civil society, we could actually run a crowdfunding project to support the criminal justice system. And we go out and raise massively resources into a crowdfunding model, and maybe the resources then, the mechanism could be decided. But the idea is that we in a context where you have resources declining, etc. I know if you say business people must donate to, people will say, that's capture. Or if you say individual must add that, people will say capture. But I think if you have a model that is transparent, a crowdfunding model, that's coordinated by civil society, that seeks to raise funding, and specifically to support the fight against corruption. And that could help. It will go a long way to actually help obviate our challenges. And then that's not just protest. It's not just protest. It's actually beginning to do something about it, and in a coordinated fashion, as it were. So I could go on with campaigns, but I'm saying we need to be creative and think about a couple of campaigns that we have. Can I end by probably, again, depressing you a little bit, by saying the fight back is real. The fight back is real. I mean, it's like as you fix one side of government or one side of the problem, the other one emerges on somebody on the other side and destroy another component, etc. It is real. And I think many of us are beginning to trip because of the fight back, essentially. And the tripping you see in if you look at the narrative in the media, sometimes it shows the tripping that we're kind of beginning to have in this. So it does require a bit of vigilance and understanding, I think, what happens in the social media. And I think as civil society beginning to analyze what happens in the social media and the extent to which it is being used for disinformation and misdirecting efforts of citizens away from real issues of fighting against state capture. It is prevalent in politics. I mean, my sense is that the ruling party seems to be so preoccupied with its internal faction fights, actually. And again, that's the problem. I mean, that's the problem in a context where the fight back is severe. You're likely to kind of go back into your cocoon. And all that it means is that the road ahead is still very difficult and challenging. And we can only win if we are organized, but not just organized, clear about what our agenda is. I thank you.